Kaan. I am from the linguistics department here at UF. My specialization is language and the brain. And I was asked to give this presentation because in the last couple of years I have served on an NSF review panel and I've seen lots of DIGs. DIG is the name for the Doctoral Dissertation Improvement Grants. So is the video all set up now? Great, thank you. Okay. Actually, I'd like to start by thanking my colleague Eric Potsdam for giving me some of his slides. Eric was the program officer for Nsf Linguistics a couple of years ago. And he was actually first invited to give the current talk, but he couldn't make it and asked me instead to give the presentation. So I thank him for some of his slides. I also like to thank some of my students or my colleagues' students for allowing me to present excerpts from their grant proposals. So the vision of the National Science Foundation is to advance discovery, innovation, and education beyond the frontiers of current knowledge. So they're really looking for something original, something that enhances what we know. And they have lots of different grant mechanisms, but what would be relevant for you guys is the Doctoral Dissertation Improvement Grant, or the DIG, or the DRIG. DIG is a bit easier, so I'll be talking about DIGs from now on. So how do you decide whether a DIG is good for you? Well, first of all, you need to be a PhD student. Second, it's for your dissertation research. Okay, and that dissertation research must be something original, something that it's not equal to what your advisor is doing. And that's what the initials stand for. It's to improve the quality of the doctoral dissertation research. That's why it's called that way. And it's judged on the basis of scientific merit. So like Bess was saying in the other hour, it's not because you need money, it's because your idea is very good, and that's why they give you money. So the funding differs per program. It's typically for 1 to 2 years, and it's ranging from $10,000 to $20,000, also depending on the program. You cannot use this money for stipends. You cannot use this money for things that your institution normally provides, like overhead. It is open to international students, provided that you are enrolled at a U.S. university. Some people think that they need to be ABD before they can apply, that they need to have had all the requirements out of the way. That is not true. Okay, you can even apply if you still need to do your quals. But you need to be close. You need to be able to come up with a good research plan. Okay, so that's the main qualifications here, the main criteria. I said on the next slide a couple of times, this depends on the program. Well, what is a program? You need to step back a little bit and see how NSF is divided up. So NSF is divided up into several directorates. And of course, they love abbreviations. So social, behavioral, economic sciences is one directorate called SBE. There are more. Within each directorate, there are divisions. Again, they love acronyms. SBE for this year has the divisions, among others, BCS, Behavioral Cognitive Sciences, SES, Social and Economic Sciences, etc. Within each division, so within BCS, for instance, you have the programs, for instance, linguistics, anthropology, social sciences. Okay, and these programs might have specific requirements, so it's essential that you go to your program website and look at what the specific requirements are for the doctoral dissertation applications. Not all programs support DIGs. Okay, so these are actually taken from the NSF website. These are all the programs that support DIGs. If you know a little bit about NSF, you might notice that some are not on there, like perception, action, and cognition is not on there. And if you're a psychologist, that might have been the program that you would apply for. So in order to apply for a DIG, you need to find a program that's kind of close to what you're doing, for instance, linguistics. But you need to make sure that your goals of your research is linguistic in nature, if you want to do that. Okay, so you cannot just apply to any program. Look at it closely. Talk to people about it too. You can apply to more than one program simultaneously. For instance, if you're doing endangered languages, you can apply to both anthropology and linguistics at the same time. It doesn't mean you need to submit 2 applications. You submit only 1 application, and you indicate that it can be reviewed by 2 programs. So again, the guidelines and deadlines, and the amount of money, the duration differs per program, so it's essential that you know what to do. And I suggest please contact the program officer. That's the person at NSF who works for that particular program. And you can find the contact information by going to this website. For instance, if you are in linguistics, you go to the linguistics website of NSF. And right here, and this is the case for all program websites, right at the top are the program officers. Typically, these home pages also list very useful information about the grant opportunities that they support. For instance, in linguistics, if you scroll down something here, it says something about doctoral dissertation improvement grants already. So you can click on that link and up pop the program-specific guidelines. So do that for your own programs. So how do you start? Well, first of all, you need to have a good idea. You need to have a good dissertation proposal already, like written down or at least in your head, worked out in good detail. So say that you think it's worth applying for a dig. What do you do first? Well, first of all, read the guidelines. And there are 3 different documents that you would need to consult and read in a very detailed way. First of all is the general doctoral dissertation improvement guidelines. So read that carefully. They will refer to the general guidelines. So these are guidelines for all NSF proposals. So sometimes they will say for this and this criterion, for formatting or something, we refer to the general proposal guide. So read that proposal guide too. Then again, go to the specific program website and read the program-specific guidelines. And then it's very helpful to find awards or funded proposals in your field, something that looks like what you're going to propose. So how do you do that? There's this fantastic website called Award Search within NSF, and you can search for title. So for instance, you have doctoral dissertation in the title, and for instance, you are in social linguistics, you type in social linguistics or something like that, or a particular language, or particular whatever your field is, and up pop the awards that have been granted. They won't give you the entire grant proposal. They only give you an abstract. But they do give you the name of the awardees. So if you think, well, oh, that looks very interesting, just email that person to say, well, I've seen that you have a grant. Would you be willing to share this with me, or to share your grant proposal with me? And often they will say, yeah, sure. And that is a way for you to get good examples of funded grants and look at how they're doing it, especially related to their field. So if you were at this morning's lecture by Bruce McFadden, he already went over the NSF review criteria. So these review criteria are the same no matter what kind of NSF proposal you are applying, you are submitting. NSF has 2 things. One, intellectual merits. That is, what is the academic benefit of your proposal? The second are the broader impacts. So why does society care? For a dissertation grant, the broader impacts are not that important. The panelists often cut you a lot of slack, but you do need to list them. If you want to have more details about this, these merits, go to this website right here. But I worked them out on the next slide. So intellectual merits are criteria that show that your proposal is academically good, so academically worth funding. And you need to think about what is new about your proposal. How does it advance the current understanding of your field? So in your proposal, you need to make clear that you see somewhere where the gap is in past research. So blah, blah did this and this, however they forgot to do this, or however we still don't know what XYZ is. In my proposal, I'm going to do this. I'm going to advance the field by investigating this missing piece of information. So that's the first bullet. The second bullet is showing that you are not just replicating other people's work, but that you contribute to something new and original. Transformative concept, it's a big word. Often it doesn't apply to a doctoral dissertation improvement grant. Sometimes for real research grants, so grants submitted by faculty, something can be transformative if they, for instance, propose a whole new framework of studying XYZ or a whole new analysis method. That's a transformative proposal. For doctoral dissertation grants, we don't expect you to do that. The third point is that you show that you have worked out what you're going to do. So you need to propose, so if you research is experimental in nature, so if you're doing experiments with people or animals, you need to describe these experiments in detail. You need to anticipate problems. You need to make sure that all infrastructure is in place. For instance, if you're going to collaborate with a lab in Illinois, you need to prove that you need to have these research connections or that they're willing to have you do the research over there. Then you need to be clear that you yourself and your advisor are qualified to do that kind of research. For instance, if you're proposing to do a whole new, to use a whole new method that you don't have any experience in yourself or with yourself, you need to be sure that your advisor is an expert using that kind of technique. Or you ask somebody else to join you on the grant proposal that somebody else is an expert. So you need to be sure that your team has all the expertise needed to bring this project to a good end. And of course, your access to resources need to be sufficient. So if you, again, want to use a particular technique, you want to be sure that indeed your university has access to that particular technique. If you have any questions, just feel free to interrupt me. Yeah?
You're talking about ideas, how you protect your ideas. You have to patent, you have a right confidentiality agreement in order to receive that, because what's happened after, you put this, you shared your idea. How you protect that idea? You're going to research. You find something unique.
Mm-hmm.
And then?
I'm afraid I don't really understand your question. You mean
Okay,
when you're
I'm
asking other people for their grant proposals, or?
Yeah, I'm looking for funding
Right.
to work on my research.
Uh-huh.
Specifically, I work with plant extracts.
Right.
Okay, I found a good use of that plant extract. How I can protect that idea for, how can I then get some progress on that? Or is the idea will become public knowledge?
Well, NSF likes you to disseminate your findings. Okay, so if you find something new, they want you to publish it and want you to make it accessible to other researchers.
I think you're meaning, though, when you have your idea and you submit it in the grant, everybody reading the grant sees your idea, and then if they don't fund you, how do you protect someone reading the grant from taking the idea? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Because by the time you've done the research and stuff, then of course it's going to tell people about it. It's the,
Let's say I find a plant to cure for cancer. How I can protect that?
Well, as a panelist, I need to sign a confidentiality agreement. So if I review something, I have to destroy it afterwards. I cannot share it with not even my students. Okay, that's confidential information. Also, at the panel session itself, say we write something on a piece of paper, that needs to be shredded. We cannot just throw it in the trash. Okay, so we're treating all grant proposals in a very confidential way.
Okay. And
But
the university has some rights on the study after I complete the study?
That might be dependent on your department. So you would need to talk to people about that. And actually, I'll get back to that later when we start talking about the data management plan.
Okay, thank you.
My field of study was not in the list of programs,
Mhm.
but I noticed that measurement was.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm going to do research on a measurement tool
Mhm.
in my field, which is not in those
Mhm.
programs, then I can just submit it as a measurement tool.
Yeah, so talk to the program officer. Give a little summary of what you want to do and whether they would think it's appropriate for you to submit under their program.
Okay.
So that's what program officers are there for. Okay, they're there to supply you with information, and of course they want as many grants funded under their chairmanship. Okay, so they're there to help you. Any other questions about intellectual merits? Okay, broader impacts. Or in other words, like Dr. J. Shankar put it, why would you grant more care? Okay, so what are the wider implications of your research? And Bruce McFadden this morning did a great job in giving examples of what you can do. Again, this is just a dissertation proposal, so we don't expect people to not have huge plans of international collaboration and setting up huge things. But you can think of how you can promote teaching, training, and learning, for instance, by involving some undergraduates. Or you talk to pre-collegiate education here and see whether you can involve some high school students in your project. Another example would be participation of underrepresented groups. So for instance, if you're from a minority background, mention it. Because them giving you money already supports that underrepresented groups get ahead in academia and serve as a leader position. You can think of outreach. You can think of enhancement of infrastructure, especially if you're doing international research. Mention that, because say you're doing research in Brazil at a university there, that enhances the research ties between UF and a Brazilian institution. So mention that. That's important in terms of broader impacts. Then another point is dissemination of research and the results. So formally, it would be sufficient just to say, well, I'm going to present at international conferences and publish in journals. That's no longer really sufficient. Again, for a dissertation proposal, it will still cut you some slack, but if you can think beyond that, that would work in your favor. For instance, like Bruce McFadden said this morning, see if you can present your research at local groups, like fossil groups or astronomy clubs or speech pathologists. Try to publish in popular magazines. That's a way to disseminate your results to the wider public. And then the last point here are benefits to society. So sometimes it doesn't directly apply to your research. Let's say you're doing research on education, well, that has a direct benefit to educational practices, so mention that. Any questions about broader impacts? Yeah.
I hear that the Nsf doesn't really like to hear talking about curing diseases or stopping the spread disease. Is that true or not? Is that true, and when would that be a good broad impact if I were to write about that?
If it's directly related to your research. Okay, so if you're doing something like very tiny, and in order for it to stop cancer, you need to do like a million different steps in between, that's not a direct broader impact of your research. Eventually it contributes to that, but not directly. So I would tone it down a little bit.
Either way, let's say I stop somebody, like I study mosquitoes. Say I develop something to stop the spread of mosquitoes. Would that be something that would be considered a broad impact because of mosquitoes spread disease?
Yeah, I would mention that. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
Just tell me again why NSF valued the international collaboration, because NSF is the American government agency?
Yeah, but they value collaboration between universities. And for some reason, internationalization is now a very fashionable word. And I foresee in the future that, and Bruce McFadden mentioned that as well this morning, that the way funding is going, they're really going towards big projects that involve lots of different universities, lots of different cultures, lots of different countries.
So that would apply not just to universities abroad, but as well as NGOs abroad and
Yes.
conservation programs within the government.
Okay, these questions are kind of leading into what I was thinking about. So in terms of benefits to society, you're talking about the whole world, not just American society. Okay, so as far as it's relevant.
Any more questions? So, say you have a good idea. Say you have an idea of the intellectual merits and broader impact. Say you're about to sit down and write the actual dissertation. What would you need? And that's all in this list here. NSF provides you with a form that you need to complete. That's indicated by the little star there. Some are stuff that you need to supply yourself, for which no real structure is given or for which it's just flowing text. And especially the project summary and the project description are the beef of the proposal. The other is just like little documents. The project description is the actual proposal. This is where you say what you're going to do. The length differs per program. Again, be sure that you know what the limits are for your particular program. For linguistics, it's 10 pages. The project summary is an abstract. And what Beth said, it's best to write at last. So once you've done everything, I mean, it's all in your head what the essentials are of your proposal. So write your project summary last. And for NSF, that's 1 page. And you upload all these things through Fastlane. You can access Fastlane through the NSF main website, but I just typically just type in fastlane.nsf.gov. And you need to have a login name. You get a login name by contacting people at the UF Division of Sponsored Research. All proposals go through them, actually. Actually, they're the ones submitting it, not you. So go to their website, ask them whether you can have a Fastlane account, and they'll set it up for you. What you need to remember for DIGS is that your advisor is what's called a principal investigator, the PI. So actually that's the first name on the grant. You are the co-PI. So if you're talking about what you're going to do, you say we or say the co-PI. Don't say I, because if I'm a reviewer, I think I refers to the PI. It's a bit confusing. So once you're in Fastlane, you need to log in, and then I think this is the page you already get. There might be 1 page before that, but it's kind of obvious what you need to do and what you need to click on. You might need to click on proposal functions. And then you get to this page, and what is essential is that you click on the second one, proposal preparation. So once you've clicked on that, you see all the elements that you would need to provide. And this works pretty obvious. You just click on go, and another page opens with what you would need to upload or what you would need to complete. So for instance, the cover sheet, that's what you would need to complete first, because that contains the title of your proposal and other things. So if you click on cover sheet, some fields are automatically populated with UF-specific information. That's why you need to apply for a Fastlane account through the UF DSR, because then they know, oh, it's already UF. So all this stuff is already there. What you do need to complete here is that you are applying for a DIG proposal. So here at Program Announcement Solicitation Number, you need to complete this number here. That's the number associated with DIGS. Then you need to select your units. That is just a different word for programs. So you click on that. And then you first need to select your directorate. So if you're in linguistics, you click the directorate SVE, and then you click the division BCS. So once that's selected, you have this scroll down menu with all the possible programs within that directorate. Sorry, within that division. And you just click on one. So you first select the most important program for you. Say linguistics. Like I mentioned before, you can apply to more than one program at the same time, but you always need to define a primary program. So once you define the primary program here, you can repeat it as desired. So you can actually select another program, for instance, anthropology. And then here you make sure that the topmost is the one that's most important for you. So what's the advantage of applying to more than one program? It's that your funding is taken into consideration twice. So you actually have two chances rather than one chance. And that often works to your advantage. So if you happen to have some reviewers within linguistics that, I don't really like it, but in anthropology they sent your proposal to different reviewers and they did like it, then your proposal might be funded by anthropology. But it's always the program officers that decide at the end. So they weigh both panel decisions, the anthropology one and the linguistics one, and they decide, oh, okay, it's fundable, not fundable. But it does increase your chances. Of course, don't force it. So if your proposal doesn't have anything to do with anthropology, then don't submit it there. It does need to make sense. Yes?
If you're going to be submitting it for the consideration for two different ones, should the language that you use reflect that, rather than just kind of like just tailoring it to one specific subject, like you were saying in linguistics?
Yeah, I would bear that in mind while writing the proposal. Yes.
You have on the slide on the thing to fill out some number Nsf 0605. What is that number?
That's 06-605. That's the number referring to the project solicitation. That's actually the specific guidelines where it says who's eligible, what you need to do. Actually, it refers to this website over here. This one over here, it's the same number. Yeah.
There is one for PI. So if you have two students, with more students, I have more. I don't know. Like my advisor has more students that want to apply for.
As a PI, you can submit more than one dig. I've seen that happen. Yes. No problem.
Is there a deadline on when these are submitted?
Yes, it says in the program solicitation. So I know for linguistics, it's every July 15th and January 15th, but it differs depending on the program.
And then when is it funded?
About 6 months later, you hear. Okay, so we're still working on the cover sheet. And then there's this last thing saying remainder of the cover sheet, and it will be kind of obvious what you would need to complete. For instance, a title, kind of essential. Also, make sure that you start with doctoral dissertation research column, because that identifies your proposal to us as panelists as a dissertation proposal. Because we'll be reviewing your proposal in the same round as the normal research grants, the conference research grants, the career awards. It's all together. So the title tells us, oh, that's a dissertation grant, and we will treat it as such. Also be informative. So make sure that your title covers what you're doing. For instance, a cat is like a tree. What does that say about your proposal? And I'm not making that up. I've seen something like that. Or for instance, documenting an endangered language. Why is that not a good title?
Which language?
Yeah, which language? Where in the world? Yes. And also documenting an endangered language. It's probably not what you're going to do in 2 years, right? You need a lot of time to document a language. So you're probably only going to look at something very specific. So that needs to be in your title too. And so make sure that your title is informative. It also helps us panelists to select which grants we would like to review. And so if the title is informative, what's going to happen, then I can see, oh, that's my field. I'm going to select that grant to review. In the cover page, you also need to submit how long your grant's going to take or your research is going to take. Stay within the specific duration specified by your program. So typically it's 1 to 2 years. Again, the co-PI is yourself. The PI is your advisor. So list your advisor first, then yourself. On this cover sheet, you also need to complete human subjects information. So if your research involves data extracted from living human beings, you need to have IRB approval. Of course, sometimes it takes up to half a year to get approval. So if you don't have approval yet, just say pending. If you do have approval, you can complete the date and the IRB number and stuff like that. However, if you say pending there, and once the program officer contacts you with the good news that you might be funded, the first thing you need to do is get approval, because without approval, you cannot get the money. So bear that in mind. So that was the cover sheet. Any questions about that? All right. Let's go to the project summary. So the project summary is the abstract. And I recommend you write that as the last thing. But it's kind of critical, that's why I'm discussing it, to make sure I cover this before anything else. There's specific requirements to the summary. It needs to be 1 page. And ideally, it needs to have 3 paragraphs. The first paragraph specifies the aims of your research and what you're going to do. Then we have 2 different paragraphs. One summarizing the intellectual merit, the other summarizing the broader impact. The requirements state, the guidelines state that you write it in 3rd person. So say things like, the student co-PI will do this and this. Don't say, I do this and this, or we will do this and this. This summary, this project summary, is very important because most members of a review panel will only read this part of your proposal. So it's very, very important. So just don't write it in 2 hours. Just spend some time writing it. So to give you an idea of what a good summary looks like, you can turn to your handout, page 9. I'm sorry, it's rather small. But this is from a funded proposal of one of our students within linguistics. And she was looking at the roles of perception and production in adult acquisition of a new dialect. And this is really a nice structure of a proposal. So what she does first, she starts with a bang. She says, this study tests the ability to blah, blah, blah. So she first starts with the goal of her research. So as a reviewer, I immediately think, that's what she's going to do. So that's the first paragraph here. The second, she works that out. So she says what she is going to do. So how she's going to collect data. What exactly is her research about? Note that it's 3rd person and that she says the co-PI will. What I also see in other proposals is things like under the supervision of Dr. Blondeau, Zoziliak will blah, blah, blah. So that means both your PI and the co-PI. So that's another way to formulate things. In the 3rd paragraph, she discusses potential outcomes of the research. So these 3 paragraphs together give a really nice summary of what the project is about and what she expects. Then she has this particular header for intellectual merit and one for broader impact. That is required, and it helps reviewers because they are reviewing the proposal on these 2 criteria. So make sure that reviewers can find that information pretty quickly. In this proposal, actually the broader impacts are very, very strong, and I regret that this is a bit too small for us to discuss them. But for instance, the PI and the co-PI are women. That's good, underrepresented groups. If you read it carefully, she also disseminates her data. So she proposes to store the interviews at a library in Indiana, in a museum. So that's the broader dissemination of data. So I think this is a really good example of a summary. Yes?
Helen, we have her proposal, the
That's
full
right.
proposal in the library's
Right.
website.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Questions about summaries? Okay, now let's go to the beef. So the project description is where you really say what you want to do. So this is the actual research plan. Again, page limits are specific to the program. Don't go over that page limit, otherwise your proposal will be rejected without review, which means that you need to wait until the next round 6 months later. So it's a waste of a lot of time. Make also sure that your formatting is the way it's described in the guidelines, that you don't use a font that's smaller than XYZ. So here you can use first person. Again, if you use the word I, it might be a bit ambiguous. So do you mean yourself? Do you mean your advisor? So I suggest you use either we, or if you're doing things yourself, say the co-PI or the student co-PI will, blah, blah. There are actually no strong requirements concerning the structure, but as a reviewer, you expect certain information to be there. Certain information has to be there, but there are no requirements as to where in the proposal you need to list it. But what I really like is a structure like I have on the slide there. So I like my first paragraph or first section to be a sort of summary of what you're going to do. And then you can work that out in the next sections. Note, by the way, that the reference literature goes in a separate document. So that's not included in this 10 to 15 page limit. So you don't need to worry about that. So in the first paragraph, as a reviewer, I really like it that it's a summary of what people are going to do. You also need to bear in mind that for most panelists, the first paragraph and your summary are the only things they read. So they don't have much time to read the rest of your proposal. So make sure that that's in a nutshell what you're going to do. So introduce your aims and research questions. Summarize what exactly you will be doing, what your expected outcomes are, and why you're qualified. And you can copy that from your summary. I've seen that happen, and that's okay. So if you now turn to page 10 on your handout, this is the first paragraph of a project that got very high marks, but didn't quite meet the funding mark. But I really like the way the introduction was structured here. So this is a proposal looking at tone languages in an area in a Tibetan area near India. And in the introduction, they first introduce what languages are being studied here. And figures are always good. Reviewers love figures because in a nutshell they give all kinds of information. So if you have space for figures, make sure to use them. But don't forget to refer to them in the name text. So, and actually this person forgot to, it doesn't say see figure 1, but he actually had to do that. Then what I like about this introduction too is that it clearly defines the gaps, the unknowns. So however, not much work has been done in regard to blah blah. However, these works were not specifically aimed at describing the tonal phonology. There are perceptible gaps in this work due to blah blah. So this clearly defines, well, there is some research out there, that research is good, but we're missing XYZ. And my research is gonna work on that. Then, the aims of the proposed study are clearly specified, and you can do it bulleted, you can give them Roman numerals, A, B, C. And in the remainder of this introduction, he works out every one of the three. In the actual proposal, that's where the introduction stops. But if I would do it a little bit better, I would insert a final paragraph in which I say why I'm qualified. So for instance, the data will be collected from native speakers by the co-PI. The co-PI will spend 2 months in the field and 3 months at a collaborating institution in India, the University of blah blah. The co-PI is a native speaker of language Y. He has traveled to blah blah in the past and has ample experience collecting and analyzing acoustic data. And you can cite your own publication. So this shows you that we have international collaboration. You're going to collaborate with the University of ABC. And we have plenty of experience. We've done this stuff before in the past successfully because we have published on this. Cite your publications. So this is really good to insert in this first section because it convinces people, yes, we're dealing with a qualified team here. Okay, questions about introduction sections? So it's really good to have a good summary of what you're going to do. And then in the rest of your proposal, so for instance, your aims and background section will be section number 2. You work out each of these aims in more detail. And you embed it in the literature. Note that this is not a dissertation, so don't spend 5 pages reviewing the literature and every single article on what you're going to deal with. Be selective. Just discuss the literature that's really relevant for what you're going to do. Do know your stuff, okay, and anticipate who might be reviewing your grant proposal. Okay, if there is this hotshot in the field, make sure you cite him because he or she is probably going to review your proposal. So know your stuff. You don't claim things that are not true or things that you don't know. And don't offend potential reviewers, so no polemics. Don't step on people's toes. Okay, so that would be section 2. I don't have an example of that, but you can look at the library website and see how other people did that. After your background section, you discuss your research plan. So here for each aim or research question, you work out how you are going to assess that. So what is your methodology? What are the potential problems? If you have pilot data, provide them because it convinces the reviewers that you're capable of doing the research and that the data are in the direction that you predict them to be. So a very nice example of a research plan is on the library website. It's a proposal by Pash, I forgot his first name. It's under funding. I think it says it's a pre-doctoral fellowship, but actually it's a dig. And on your handout, I copied the first part of his research plan, and he had a very nice way of doing that. So in the middle and beginning of his proposal, he defines different aims. He calls them aim 1, 2, and 3. Then in the proposed research section of his research description, he discusses each of the aims. So he starts with aim 1. Aim 1 was blah. This is the rationale. This is my hypothesis related to aim 1. These are my predictions. Actually, he does use I, which I don't really like. So if I were to write this over again, I would say the co-PI. Okay, so for every aim, he does that. So after predictions, he has methods. So in detail, he says what exactly he's going to do. And then for each aim, there's the challenges and alternatives. So what kind of problems might occur? And if that's the case, what would you do as a backup plan? So he does that for all the 3 aims that he has.
Was this funded?
Yes. And a complete proposal is available at the library website. Then your main proposal, so the project description, also needs to specifically mention the intellectual merits and broader impact. So make sure you have headers, and you can copy from your summary, that's no problem. You can preferably work it out a little bit more. What I forgot to mention previously is that you shouldn't really stretch your broader impacts. So for instance, I was reading a proposal that looked at how Mexican speakers of Spanish acquired certain aspects of English grammar. It was a very fundamental type of research. And in the broader impacts it said, well, knowing how native speakers of Spanish use the gerund will affect their integration into American society or something like that. So that's too much of a stretch. Okay, so that's really stretching it. That's really looking for broader impacts. So make sure that your broader impacts directly follow from your proposal. So don't make stuff up. Also, and I see that a lot when people are investigating second language learning, they say, oh, this has implications for the language classroom. But in their proposal, they don't collaborate with educators at all. Okay, so that's not a direct broader impact of this specific proposal. Eventually, down the line, it might have effect on education, but not the proposal itself. So don't stretch it. Then another element that needs to be there in the project description is a timeline. And this is also copied from the proposal by Cash that's available on the library website. Use tables. That's very convenient, doesn't take up much space. But I really like this here. He has aim 1, 2, and 3, or sorry, aim 1 and 2, specifies when he's going to do what. I mean, that's what reviewers want to know. So they want to know whether this proposal is feasible in the time allotted. Okay, so that was the project description. You guys have any questions about that? So get your hands on as many proposals as you can that are related to your field so you can see how people build up their proposal. Also ask your faculties, also by looking at other types of grants, so that's very helpful in how you phrase your aims and how you work it out. Okay, and NSF has lots of other stuff that you need to complete. The budget is pretty important too. The budget limitations also vary per program. Typically it's 10 to 20K. So make sure you don't go over. Then also limit yourself to what you actually need, not to what you really want. Okay, you want a fancy laptop, but you don't need it, so don't list it. Include actual prices. So don't guess, and I'll give an example of that later. Don't inflate, don't look for stuff that you don't really need or, overestimate your hotel costs. And make sure you have clear justifications, yes?
When you invest in equipment need for your research, you have to present different quotes, 2, 3 quotes, or you just put one quote?
I would just pick one that's reasonable and that you probably end up buying.
Okay.
So I've seen, for instance, in my field, people often request digital recorders, and I often only see one particular recorder listed. So they do specify what model and stuff, and they list the price. So for, as examples, you can think of survey costs. If you're running experiments, payments to subjects, research equipment like this digital recorder, video camera. However, you only have 20K, so you cannot buy like an fMRI machine or something like that. And also things that are already there at the university, it doesn't make sense to buy a new one. So if your department already has 10 digital recorders, it doesn't make sense for you to buy another one. You can think of travel money. That's what I see a lot. Living expenses if you need to do field research. What is not allowed are stipends or salaries. No indirect costs. Those are costs that go to the university for administration and for electricity and stuff. No publication costs. And a research assistant is not allowed. So you cannot hire a fellow graduate student to be your research assistant. You might be able to have some money for undergraduates to help you transcribe data or things like that, but you need to be very specific why you need such assistance. So in Fastlane, there is a form that you would need to complete. This looks like this roughly. This would be page number 1. So for each year, you need to make a budget. So if you have 2 years, you need to have a budget for 2 years. The first year, so this is personnel. List the PI, so that's your advisor, and list yourself. And salary should be 0. You cannot request any salary. So that's what it looks like. There are other posts as well. So for instance, if you hired an undergraduate, this would be what you complete here. And later on is travel as well. Aside from this table, you need to justify it. So you need to have a separate document that is the justification. And let me just give you an example of how to justify travel. This is from one of my own grants. So I anticipated to go to this neuroscience conference. At the time that I was submitting it, I didn't know where the conference was going to be 3 years down the line. So I just say, well, typically it's in April. The 2010 conference will be in Montreal, and I just base my estimates on the basis of that. It might be somewhere completely different by the time I get to it, but this is just what I use as a quote. Then I look up what it costs to fly to Gainesville. Let's say when I requested that quote, for what period. So I requested it in January for flying in April. What the fees are, and I base myself on past conferences because the future conference information was not available. And then I have lodging and meals. And what I use and what I see a lot is the GSA rate. That's the General Services Administration, and this is the website. And you can go in and they give you tables of what the per diem is for a particular location within the United States or within Canada. So use that to estimate the lodging and or stay under that at least. So for instance, say, give a number here and then say, well, this is 40% of the GSA rate. For international, you need to use this website of the Department of State.
So where does Canada fit in? It's under
I
domestic.
think it's domestic, yeah.
It is a different country.
Yeah, but it's treated as domestic travel. Also read the guidelines. It will say in the guidelines what is domestic and what is international. Also, you need to use U.S. airlines. Okay, NSF is pretty critical about that. So even if Iceland Air is cheaper to fly to Europe than Delta, you do need to fly Delta because it needs to be a U.S. carrier. Any questions about the budget? Yeah.
Do you need to write matching funds? Is it better if you do?
Yes. So you need to be very specific about what gets paid from a different fund and what you request NSF money for. Also contact the program officer to make sure that it's how you did it is clear. Any more questions about budgets?
I saw that they don't pay anything like salary or stuff, but how about tuitions?
No.
No.
So if you're funded, do you include that as a matching fund? Because some of us might be funded, required due to other funding that we receive to still be enrolled in the university while we're conducting research. So do we include that as a form of matching fund?
I won't in a particular budget. You do need to complete some funding, but it's not tuition. But I'll get to that in a few slides. Okay. Let's move to Biosketches. A lot of people think, oh, I just can insert my CV. No, a Biosketch is not the CV. You need to follow the guidelines. So a biosketch is a 2-page document, 1 to 2 pages, and it needs to follow a particular structure. So this is Jennifer's biosketch. You start with your professional preparation. It needs to be in chronological order, what degrees you had when. Then you have up to 5 publications that are related to the specific project. If you have more publications, you can enter them under another header saying other publications, only up to 5. Then what is required is that you have another section saying collaborators, and you need to list every person that was on your that was your advisor or was co-author on your papers. And they do this to avoid conflicts of interest. So when they select reviewers for your proposal, they make sure it doesn't go to Carlos there. That's why you need to list that. So yeah.
About related publications, but you haven't done any publication regarding this particular research.
Mm-hmm.
You don't put nothing in there?
I would then just say publications and you just list what you have.
Okay.
Because you probably have something that's to some extent related to what you're proposing, because you need to show some expertise in what you're doing. So I've seen things that were not exactly related, but they do list them. So you can do that.
Okay.
But list something, because if you don't list any publications, they'll think, well, hey, you know.
Yeah, what's the background of
Yeah.
this guy? Well, I have been working with plant diseases in tropical plants.
Mm-hmm.
And I started to research and plant extracts to develop, fungicides, insecticides based on plant extracts.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I ended here in Florida, because of the diversity of invasive plants
Mm-hmm.
that has some particular interesting compounds, but I haven't
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
done this before.
I would still list that under publications. Yeah. Or maybe you can just say publications without related or other, and just list 5
Okay.
previous publications. Yeah.
Okay.
Just to clarify the co-PIs, you said you put plural here as well on the slide before, so you could have multiple.
Yes, so
I
for
thought you were just primarily co-PI and have a PI.
yeah, so your advisor is your PI. Yourself will be the first co-PI. But say you need the expertise of somebody else, you can add that as another co-PI.
Not as a collaborator.
No, co-PI or consultant. You need to include the biosketches of all PIs and co-PIs. So if you have this other person that's on your committee and that is on the grant, you need to include his or her biosketch as well. Advisors are often lazy, so if you ask them for a biosketch, they often send you their CV. Edit them yourself to make sure that everything looks the same and follows the guidelines. It gives the proposal also a more polished look. The questions about biosketches?
Submitted or in preparation, publications would still be good, right?
I don't know by heart. You need to read the guidelines, what they want. I guess impress is okay. Submit it, probably not. So that's what I remember. It might be wrong. All right. New is data management plan, or dump, as we call it in the panel. This is the first year that this is required, so your advisor probably doesn't know anything about this. So it's up to you how to really formulate it. There are some regulations, especially this website gives a good overview, but what NSF is looking for is just a 1 to 2 page document saying what type of data you're collecting, how you're storing these data, and how are you going to disseminate this data. NSF is very much in favor of sharing data with other researchers. So you need to describe whether you're going to do that and how. So for instance, the type of data, you need to think of questionnaires, you need to think of reaction time data, of blood samples, of whatever. How these are stored, for instance, hard copies in the log file cabinet. soft copies on a hard drive shared by lab members or backed up by blah, blah, blah. And I kept for years. And as far as dissemination, what I've seen is things like after research has been published, the identified data will be made available to researchers who request access. So that is sufficient. Don't say things like data will not be accessible by external researchers, or data will be erased after the co-PI leaves UF. That's not what NSF wants. If something comes up related to patenting or other IRB related issues, talk to the people here at UF, talk to the IRB. Of course, if you are thinking about dissemination, make sure that in your informed consent form you specify that as well. So work closely with the IRB to make sure that you follow all regulations. Okay, so we're almost at the end. So there are a few more things that I want to deal with very quickly. Other supplementary documents. Do not submit letters of recommendation. That is not what they want. No transcripts, no recommendation letters. What they do want is showing that you have the resources. So say you're doing research in Brazil at a Brazilian university, the supplementary information needs to include a letter from this university saying, yes, this person is welcome and we provide lab space, etc. So that's what the supplementary documentation is for. Some programs require that your advisor says something like XYZ passed the quals or something, but it's not a letter of recommendation. So again, look at the program-specific guidelines here. Then we have facilities and equipment available, so you need to complete that. So that is, what kind of computers do you guys have? What kind of labs do you have? What kind of equipment do you have in the labs that you can use for your project? Then current and pending support. So if you have another grant, like NIH or Ford or whatever, it is $3,000 from like some website, you need to list that. If you just have a TA ship, you don't list that. That's not a real grant in the sense of a grant. Note that the current proposal is pending support. So it sounds a bit strange, but you do need to list that under pending support. So this always needs to be completed and always need to have at least one item in it, namely the current proposal. And then, as a final point, I'd like to point out that you can suggest reviewers. A lot of people don't think of that, and a lot of people are ashamed of doing that. It's perfectly normal, and it helps you, because often these program officers don't know all details of your field. They don't know who the big people are, who the nice people are. You know that. So you can help them by saying, well, I want my one of the suggested reviewers, so-and-so at the University of so-and-so, this is her email, and she's an expert on doing this and this and this. And she has no conflict of interest. Yeah.
How do you know who's an NSF reviewer? Now, like I could
They
pick
don't.
someone in my field, but how I know who to pick them.
No, you don't. That's confidential.
So then
But-
how do you select the name to?
Well, I mean, this is what you want. So you want X, Y, and Z. You consider them good reviewers for your proposal. You just list them there. Whether they're actually the ones reviewing your proposal, you never know.
Also, I can list names of people that I know are
Yeah.
associated with my field, and they'll maybe tie to people that are the reviewers that are associated with them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, I think they honor the request a lot. You never know, because everything is anonymous. But I mean, this is a great help for the program officers because there's names of potential reviewers that are in the field, and let's see whether they're available, and often they are. I think for NSF, I forgot to double check, but you can also list people that you do not want to review your proposal. Okay, this sounds a bit silly, but say you work in a particular framework that's really controversial. You don't want it to be reviewed by somebody of the opposite camp, because no matter what, they will they will trash it to pieces. And so that's a valid reason. So you do need to motivate why this person is probably not a good reviewer, but you're allowed to do that too. Okay, so what happens, very quickly, what happens after you hit submit on Fastlane? It doesn't go to NSF, it actually goes to DSR here at UF. Those are very nice ladies, and they will review the proposal, especially the budget, to be sure that you have uploaded everything that's required and that it's not over the limit and that everything is listed on the appropriate header. You would also need to collect signatures from, of course, your advisor, your chair, the dean of your college, and from UFDSR. So for all this to happen, allow some time, allow at least 10 business days before the official deadline. So say the deadline is July 15th, make sure your proposal gets to DSR July 5th, just to make sure that if things are wrong, that you have plenty of time to repair it. And DSR will hit submit, and then it will appear at the NSF office. What does NSF do? NSF first sees whether you adhere to the guidelines. If your proposal is 16 pages instead of 15, it gets returned to you and you don't have a chance at round anymore. If your proposal does meet the requirement, it gets submitted to the reviewers that you specify or to other reviewers that the program officer selects. After that, after the reviewers come in, the panel, the review panel, looks at your proposals. And in linguistics, the review panel consists of about 15 members. Each proposal gets read by at least 2 of these panel members. During the discussion, so every proposal gets discussed in the panel, especially between these 2 main readers of your proposal. The panel evaluates your proposal on intellectual merits, primarily, and a little bit on broader impacts, and ranks your proposal as highly competitive, medium competitive, low competitive, or non-competitive, but giving you a chance to revise, and non-competitive decline. For digs, decline often happens. It must be really bad for your proposal to end up in decline. What happens most of all is that it's either revised or in one of these. And actually, if you, in linguistics, if you're in one of these, if you're in a competitive category, your proposal will be funded because they attach a lot of importance to dissertation grants. So your chances of getting funded are pretty high. At least that's how linguistics works. I'm not sure about other projects. What I did like about this website is that it's a mock discussion. This is actually an NIH discussion. It works a little bit different from NSF, but you can clearly see the dynamics and what reviewers go through when they're discussing a proposal. So look at this if you have the time. So you should hear in about 5 months whether your proposal is funded, and resubmission is allowed. So talk to the program officer if your proposal got rejected or didn't get funded, and see why, try to find out why, what happened during the discussion, and how you can improve. So what reviewers look for is, first of all, whether your proposal is original, whether it can contribute to the field, whether it's clear, whether, for instance, the experiments that you do clearly address your aims and not something else, whether they're not confounded, that you know your literature well, that your research is clearly embedded in the literature and can contribute to theory, that it's feasible. Sometimes people propose too many experiments, and as a panel we can say, well, we can probably fund this, but only for 2 experiments, not for 5. This is always a good one. Provide pilot data. Pilot data works well in a lot of ways because it shows that you're capable of doing the research, you have all the equipment and resources. And second, if your pilot data confirm your prediction, that's really good because the chances of the proposal being successful are pretty substantial then. Yes?
The very first point there, so not just a replication of what has been done or what your advisor is doing, but if does that mean not a replication of what your advisor's doing, or if your advisor is kind of in the same area?
Yeah,
Like,
if your advisor is doing exactly that kind of research and you're just doing the same stuff or what's already funded by your advisor's grant, that,
okay, what if your
that's not
advisor's
good.
doing, you are helping out on your advisor's project,
Uh-huh.
and you're kind of,
As long
my
as-
advisor's doing a
yeah.
project, I'm helping her on it, it's the first
Uh-huh.
one of that, like, it's the
as
first
long-
one,
Yeah.
and ever been done, and I'm kind of wanting to take it and go
Uh-huh.
here with it, but we're not funded for it, we're
Mhm.
just doing it, so.
Well, if it's
If
the
it's
stake,
far
that's-
enough
that's-
away?
That's perfect,
Okay.
yes, yes. Okay, what is also very important is that your methods are described in detail so that we really know what you're gonna do, that it's solid, that there are no confounds in the design of the experiment. And if you have pilot data supporting predictions, that's really good. Also, we're looking for the expertise. So if you're using a particular technique, do you have experience with it? Does your advisor have experience with it? Do you have the equipment? Or if your research is overseas, do you have established these connections? So how you can help reviewers? I know there were some sessions about academic writing and about writing grant proposals, but what helped me a lot was just to picture what reviewers go through. So they need to read stacks and stacks and stacks of proposals, and in review sessions, panelists need to discuss at least 20 proposals, and they're getting tired, they're really tired, they don't want to read yet another proposal. So if you can help them by really highlighting the important points, by bulleting important points, by structuring it clearly, by using simple sentences, that really helps. And make it nice, no typos, make sure the English is good, just keep us in a good mood. That's what it's about, actually. So sweat the details, know your stuff. And I'm running out of time here. So a few tips to summarize. Nothing tops a good idea. Okay, so a good idea is the most important thing, the academic, intellectual merit. All the other stuff, you know, the nicely structured proposal, the broader impacts, that helps it. Okay, but if your idea is not good, there's no way your grant will get funded. So that's the most important part. Read the guidelines, start way in advance, talk to people, talk to your program officer, talk to your advisor, have people read drafts of your proposals, talk to people who got funded, ask them for their project proposal, talk to the Division of Sponsored Research about how to set up a budget, and give yourself time, so start way in advance, and also submit your project to DSR about 10 days before the official deadline. The next few slides are just useful links. They're on your handout. Zoe Ziliak, who had her grant funded, really likes the second publication here. So often people that don't have much experience, they think writing a grant proposal is like writing a journal article. That's not the case at all. These things are completely different. And this article, the second one on the slide, really specifies what the differences are between a journal article and a grant. So that's really useful. Okay, so I leave it at that. I'm sorry I don't have that much time for discussion. But I'm not in a hurry, so I can stay here for the rest of the evening if you want. But are there any questions? Okay, well, feel free to email me. That's on the first slide of your handout. Also, Eric Potsdam in our department has experience as a program officer, so he can help you out as well. And of course, the program officers of NSF are there to help you. Okay, so don't be ashamed to contact them. Yeah.